So with that, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Tom Henry. Tom is an award-winning journalist who has covered primarily environmental issues for more than 20 years now. He's contributed chapters in 2 books, one on Florida rivers and the other on nuclear power. 2010 to 2012, he was an advisor for the major Great Lakes Climate Change Communication Outreach Project, funded by the National Science Foundation, that's NSF, and undertaken by 7 Great Lake universities. In 2008, he spent 10 days in Greenland researching a 4-day, 9-story series on climate change that was recognized by the Yale Forum on Climate Change and the Medium, and the Night Science Journalism Tracker from the Columbia Journalism Review. Greenland, I like it. Tom was a member of the National Society of Environmental Journalists. He's been awarded a Kiplinger Fellowship and has twice been a fellow at the Vermont Law School studying environmental justice. And earlier this year, he became the first newspaper writer to receive the International Association for Great Lakes Research prestigious Jack Valentine Award. He also reviews music CDs and books. What that is to say is Tom's pretty well established in this field. If anyone reads the paper, and I would hope that you do, at least every now and then. If I see an article that says Tom Henry on it, I'll usually read that. You know, that's kind of when I'm skipping through the paper to prioritize my time. If I see something written by Tom, I know it's something I want to read. I found Tom to be very insightful, very knowledgeable, and very fair. So with that, I present to you Tom Henry.
Well, thanks everyone. Just a couple of things before I get started. I know that you guys, this is new to you, but 25 years for the Student Watershed Watch is very impressive. I started at the Blade 21 years ago, and I haven't been to every one, but I've been to a number of them. I've been here running a couple of panels. I've never been to Keynote before, but I've covered a lot of other Keynote speakers, and I feel like I have a real, connection here to this program. I've been out in the field with some of the students who preceded you, and it's a real great opportunity. It may not be something you recognize right now, but hopefully it'll stick with you, and you'll remember this for a long time to come. Anyways, that man also was talking about the early technology. The fax machine was something that was introduced while I was already into my career, and it seems kind of strange for me to have a piece of technology introduced and then become obsolete all within my career. I'll take you back even farther than that. When I was a intern at the Grand Rapids Press in Grand Rapids, Michigan, after my sophomore year in college, they had this new device coming out. It was called the Video Display Terminal, or VDT. Anybody know what that is? Other than Jim Blue? That's your desktop PC. They didn't used to be called desktop PCs. They were called video display terminals. But and of course they didn't do much back then. They were just basically fancy word processors. But yeah, it was pretty amazing. Anyways, I want to start off by asking you guys to pretend there are no teachers, no parents, no principals, no adults in the room, just you and me. And I want to see a show of hands here, and I'm totally serious. How many people think this sucks? This Northwest Ohio, Toledo, how many of you think this is a place you don't really want to live the rest of your life? And go ahead, it's fine. I mean, No shame, no embarrassment. I mean, I was young. I wanted to move on. I wanted to see the world. I mean, you've got to have some ambition. And, you know, you got your whole life ahead of you, as most of you know. You know, I mean, most of you aren't tied down. You could go to New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Greenland, which I really loved, actually. Or, you know, other really cool spots, London, Paris, Tokyo. You don't have to stay here. You know, it'd be nice if you did, but I'm not here to talk you out of traveling the world, because it's a fantastic opportunity. It's always great to be adventurous and to see new things. But I am here to tell you this place doesn't suck. And it doesn't suck nearly as much as you think it does. I'm not talking about the number of movie theaters, shopping malls, or other things. I'm talking about biological diversity, and in terms of nature, how the Western Lake Erie region stacks up to some other ones. You guys, I know, all probably know by now where Detroit and Cleveland are. And you know Toledo's roughly, ballpark, about halfway in the middle. Well, it turns out the Western Lake Erie shoreline of ours is the most populated part of the Great Lakes region. Western Lake Erie itself also is the warmest, shallowest, the most biologically active and diverse part of the Great Lakes region. So if you want to study the effects of climate change on freshwater and fish, or something else having to do with nature, this is a great place to do it. If you're going to see impacts from invasive species, right here, this is ground zero. A lot of them start in Western Lake Erie. And I know from scientists over the years, whether you're talking about, you know, sewage treatment laws or water treatment, how invasive species, how all these things interact. You know, Western Lake Erie is ground zero for a lot of you know, research that goes on, not just for the Great Lakes region, but that applies nationally and internationally because of how people use land and how they interact with it and how it affects water quality. I mean, land use, coastal development, sewage treatment, agricultural runoff, chicken and cow manure, and so forth creates a great big nutrient-rich soupy mess that grows algae here, which sounds kind of gross, but it actually is the whole algae story in the first place that you guys experienced and heard a lot about this summer. That has to do with the interconnectedness of how land is used and how people, you know, coexist with nature and how it affects water quality. What I'm trying to tell you is you live smack dab in the middle of one of the world's great outdoor living laboratories right now. You know, in the big picture, many of the things that happen here are ground zero, like I said, for the Great Lakes and for the rest of the world. You know, there are more populated areas, but they aren't along the coastline of one of the world's most precious and biologically dynamic bodies of fresh water. The Great Lakes, as you know, hold 20% of the world's fresh surface water. And surface is the key word. Remember that. I'll get back to that in a minute. There's a, you know, nowhere is there such a great divergence of stressors, farming, car factories, power plants, and so forth, with so many people living along the Great Lakes shoreline. Lake Erie is 50% of all the fish in the Great Lakes region, but only 2% of the water. Lake Superior, on the other hand, has 50% of the water in the Great Lakes region, but only 2% of the fish. The water that flows into Lake Superior goes through forests and wetlands. Most of the water that flows into Lake Erie picks up nutrients from farms, chemicals from industry, oil from cars, lawn fertilizers, and a whole bunch of other stuff that flows over hard concrete surfaces. So they're two very different, two different lakes, two different you know, sets of circumstances and bodies of water. So we really are living in an important laboratory here for scientific research. And nobody really knows, this is I've said to people before, this is kind of a great experiment in nature, just the fact you're living here and part of this, because nobody knows how much more this this water of ours, this fresh water, can be stressed with the way we live and how we treat the land. That's important because of the way the world's growing. There are twice as many people on Earth now as there was in the 1960s when I was a child. The 7.2 billion people now on Earth may seem like a small amount itself when the world grows to 10 billion people later this century. All those people are going to put more pressure on our land, not just here in Western Lake Erie, of course, but we're going to be counted on to grow more food for the rest of the world. And all that could be harder to do with the effects of climate change becoming more acute, effects such as heat-scorching droughts and more violent thunderstorms, and just conditions that aren't as suitable make it harder to grow food. Rain, as you know, doesn't get absorbed well into the soil when it comes down in buckets. It flows straight off into the streams, carrying nutrients that can cause algae. So as you travel the world and seek out life's adventures, and it's a wonderful opportunity if you can do that, you'll also likely take a sense of home with you. Many of you will come back, many of you won't. But everyone takes a sense of home with them, and what you have to know, wherever you end up, is that your home doesn't suck. It's really a very, very important ecosystem, not just for this area, not just because we live here and we want to root for it, but truly in terms of science, it's an important area. Okay, so remember that and be proud of it when people ask you about Western Lake Erie. Now, you've heard a lot about the Great Lakes. They're a national treasure that we share with Canada, of course. But let me drop a few things on you that you might not know about, things I say on my blog, what the Great Lakes are not. I have a blog, it's called Ripple Effect, and you can either Google that or look it up off the Toledo Blades website. Anyways, a couple of points here. The Great Lakes, believe it or not, are not the world's largest supply of fresh water. 70% of the world's fresh water is locked up in polar ice and in high altitude mountain snow. That's according to the United Nations. Nearly everything else is groundwater. And that primarily is what replenishes rivers and lakes. Does anybody know how much of all the world's freshwater lakes, rivers, streams, everything that's considered surface water? Remember, I told you, that word surface water. How much of that makes up of all of our fresh water on Earth? Any guesses? 0.3%. 0.3%, well less than 1%. So that should give you an idea of how valuable fresh water is. And of that less than 1%, 0.3%, the Great Lakes make up 20% of that. However, the Great Lakes also are not the world's largest freshwater lakes for volume. Russia's Lake Baikal holds more fresh water than all of our 5 Great Lakes combined. Lake Superior, which is the biggest Great Lake, as I'm sure you know, is a distant third. But the Great Lakes are, without question, one of the world's most valuable natural resources because of their access and their multiple uses. Unlike Siberia, where Lake Baikal is, they are home to 40 million people, 30 million in the United States and 10 million in Canada. We're in you may not believe it today, but this is actually considered a moderate climate compared to other parts of the world. The Great Lakes hold 20% of the fresh water, as I said, but probably the most important thing is that they're readily accessible to a lot of, to these 40 million peoples and for our drinking water. And they also hold 84% of what's in the surface water of North America. They hold, if anybody has any guesses here, how many gallons of water? Have you heard this? Did I hear 6? 6 quadrillion gallons of water. Now that's hard to imagine. I mean, most people can't even imagine a million, a billion, 6 quadrillion. That's basically enough. If you were to take the whole continental United States, you could submerge it in anywhere from 5 to 9 feet of water with 6 quadrillion gallons of water. They're shared by 8 states, 2 Canadian provinces for boating, fishing, agriculture, industry, power production, shipping, drinking water, residential housing, business development. One of the most diverse bodies of water in terms of their multiple uses. They have 10,900 miles of shoreline, and that's equal to almost 44% of the circumference of the Earth. Anybody have any idea how many islands there are in the Great Lakes? I mean, you've probably heard or maybe visited South Bass Island, Put-in Bay, Kelly's Island, Mackinac Island. Any guesses?
6.
A little more than that. Any other guesses? Go ahead.
20.
Keep going. Go ahead. How many?
40.
Keep going. Go ahead.
90.
Keep going. Go ahead.
100.
Keep going. Over here.
701.
Keep going. Go.
10,300.
You're almost there. Keep going.
1,200.
Still just a little short. By the way, if you go over, you have to be held after school. Just joking. Now, how many?
12,500.
12,500? No. Go ahead.
15,000.
15,000?
Yes.
You're almost halfway there. How many? They actually have an incredible 35,000 islands. Now you look at map, a great lot. How are there 35,000? A lot of them are up in the Georgian Bay, in the Georgian Bay area. And there are these, these tiny little islands, but they're hugely important for wildlife, for stopover. And out of these 35,000 islands, maybe only 6, or however many we heard, may only be the number that people actually ever really go to as tourists. But yeah, 35,000 islands are spread across the Great Lakes region. There's many in the St. Lawrence River and Georgian Bay and Lake Superior, and yeah, it's an incredible ecosystem we have here. But anyways, I want to wrap up my talk by giving you a little insight about what inspires me about journalism, and then take some questions from you guys. So start thinking of some good questions now. I like, I'm a big gregarious reporter. I just like to field questions sometimes. So start thinking of a few. But anyways, here it is, why I do what I do, okay? I admit I'm kind of a nerd. I enjoy touring sewage treatment plants. I enjoy walking through landfills and looking at garbage. If I was in the Student Watershed program like you guys, I'd enjoy wading in the streams and looking for crayfish and getting in the muck and getting my hands dirty, just like some of you guys probably did too. I like writing environmental stories, something I've done for years now. I've done a little bit of it earlier in my career, on and off. I've been a reporter for 33 years, but when I came to the Blade 21 years ago, I really focused on that and made that my specialty. But I enjoy that writing about the environment for the simple reason a lot of other writers shy away from it. Environmental stories are often the messy or the tedious ones because they have a lot of scientific gray areas. Not only because your hands might get dirty, but also because there's so much crap to sort through, whether it has to do with just confusing jargon or other things. There are a lot of gray areas in science and environmental writing, just like there is in science itself. I mean, science is an ongoing thing where you think you've got something proven and you have to keep going and testing your theory and so forth. That drives some reporters and editors nuts, but it's what fascinates me. As an environmental writer, you must learn to raise your game and be more street savvy. You must learn to decipher scientific gobbledygook, learn whom to trust, and learn who's trying to push an agenda on you. You don't get the neat thumbs up or thumbs down outcomes you get on other stories. Those few of us who are left, who are really covering the environment beat on a regular basis, recognize that we have an enormous responsibility. We have the power to needlessly inflame a community, or worse, to put it to sleep about issues they truly need to know about. We need to be fair and balanced while also being compelling storytellers. Since 1994, as Matt said, I belong to a fabulous national group of environmental writers and academics who specialize in environmental communications. It's called the Society of Environmental Journalists. It has a website at www.sej.org. I'm a former board member and been active in many ways. Through SEJ, I've gotten to know most of North America's top environmental writers and some from other parts of the world. One of our former presidents, Dan Fagan, won the Pulitzer Prize this year for general interest nonfiction books with his book about the chemical contamination of Toms River, New Jersey. It's a book the New York Times said is one of the most important. It's called Toms River. It's a book the New York Times called one of the most important environmental books since Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And if you haven't heard of Rachel Carson or Silent Spring, Google it, look it up. She's very important to the whole modern environmental movement. Truly, we have the potential to make a difference as environmental writers. I do what I do because I was a child in the 1960s and was influenced by the civil rights movement, the assassinations of JFK, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X, and others. I do what I do because, as a child, I argued at the dinner table with my father about the Vietnam War. I was influenced by the women's lib movement, the space program, and, of course, the environmental movement. I do what I do out of a sense of justice, decency, and fairness, and because I grew up in what's been called one of the first generations to question authority. I do what I do because I was exposed to the Watergate hearings as a youth, and when I delivered newspapers for the Grand Rapids Press in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I recall a series of stories by guys named Woodward and Bernstein, and a banner headline one day that had two words emblazoned across it: Nixon resigns. But above all, I do what I do because I'm fascinated by people whose lives have been forever changed by the ineptitude of others. I do what I do because Robert Redford, when asked at an SEJ conference in 1994 how environmental writers can keep up their energy and passion for their craft in the face of difficulties, responded, "If it's not you, then who will do it?" And remember that whether you're pursuing a career in journalism, science, or whatever you're pursuing your career in, if it's not going to be you who's doing it, then who's going to do it? I do what I do because when I think of doing something else, I recall the weeping voice of an autistic boy's father on the other end of the telephone, an anonymous guy who used to call me and tell me how much he loved what I was bringing to the newspaper. On one particular night, he broke down, crying, and said in the phone, "You don't fucking understand. You're my hero." No matter what you want to become in life, a scientist, a writer, a musician, whatever, remember that piece of advice: be someone's hero. So let's start in Seattle, and I've got a few slides here, where one of the many people who have inspired me throughout my career had his epiphany. There's a guy named Frank King who owned a suburban car dealership in Bellingham, Washington, which is a Seattle suburb. And his life was going pretty much according to schedule: nice home, nice job, and so forth. Only his son Wade, who was 10 years old at the time, and this is the fire in Bellingham, you can see, he got caught in a fireball in a stream called Wattam Creek. And that's because, the evidence showed later, a pipeline operator wasn't doing his job. Fuel got loose and burst into flames. Wade was one of 3 kids who died. Another was his age, and another was 18. And this became a national story that led to national pipeline reform. The thing about Wade was that all the skin above his ankles was burned off, yet he managed to live for several hours. The King family was told skin grafts could possibly prolong his life for a few weeks, but it would be incredibly painful. Or they could do the humane thing and let him die that night. They chose the latter. Frank King, his father, is shown there, and his mother, of course, never wanted to become advocates for national pipeline safety reform. But their lives were changed through the ineptitude of others, and this is one reason why I've been drawn to environmental journalism. His dad, who was a big baseball fan, Wade, the 10-year-old, was a big baseball fan, asked his dad during the night, why do I have to die, Dad? And all his father could bring himself to say was that heaven needs a catcher. And heaven needs a catcher. Those are the kind of words that stick with you. So let's think about another person who's experienced epiphany in a Seattle hospital. Kim Tolnar, who's from Ohio, beautiful woman from Central Ohio, had a good, steady job selling ads for a Columbus area television station. Her life was changed by the ineptitude of others too. Kim was one of the lucky ones though. Unlike 10-year-old Wade King, Kim lived. In her late 20s, Kim was one of many people who came down with a rare form of leukemia. That was after attending the River Valley Middle School complex in Marion, Ohio, which is about an hour north of Columbus. After spending 9 months hospitalized in the Seattle Cancer Center, Kim was really fed up. She thought God had sent her to Seattle to die. Kim tried pulling the catheter out of her chest. Her father, Kent Krumenaker, put a calming grip over his daughter's hands and gave her the loving words she needed to reassure her that this was not God's plan for her. And there's Kent and his wife Roxanne and another couple there in the Marion area. Kim came back to Ohio determined as ever to become a symbol for the Marion County leukemia victims, which years ago was Ohio's largest environmental investigation and became second only to the ongoing cancer investigation going on in Clyde, Ohio now, which I'll get to in a minute. But her father, Kent, also even had gunshot fired in his direction one day while mowing grass, yet he persevered. None of those people asked for those roles in life. Their lives were changed by the ineptitude of others. So now let's fast forward a few more years, and I met a lovely couple from Clyde, Ohio, named Wendy and Warren Brown. They were attempting to enjoy their cozy life that they had too, one they thought they had earned, until their 11-year-old daughter, Alexa, became sick with an unexplained cancer. She eventually died. Alexa is one of several children in the vicinity of Clyde, Ohio, to die from what the Ohio Department of Health declared a cancer cluster of unknown origins, something which appears to have been triggered by an environmental cause, though nobody to this day knows what it is. Cancer clusters are not easy to prove, and the guy running the investigation, Robert Indian, that's Alexa's parents, Wendy and Warren Brown. But anyways, they're not easy to prove. That Robert Indian, the Ohio Department of Health's cancer surveillance chief, is not one to be reactionary. But this time, he not only confirmed a cancer cluster of unknown origin, but in 2009 said it appears to cover a wider geographic area beyond Clyde to include all of Ohio's eastern Sandusky County. So when you do water quality tests, don't just think this is an exercise, an academic thing. A lot of times, these kind of, the kind of tests you do generate the kind of research that's used to help people. Warren and Wendy Brown have gone through sheer hell, as have other victims, such as Dave Heisey, who runs Clyde's only grocery store. Warren and Wendy had confidence in our county, state, and federal government before their ordeal began. So did Dave, I'll put him up. So did Dave, whose son Tanner Heisey was in Alexa's age group. Tanner's still with us, a spry and determined young man who has gone through several cancer treatments. He's come here to Toledo for them and acts mature beyond his age. The Browns, the Heiseys, and other victims of the mysterious Clyde cancer cluster have had their lives changed by the ineptitude of others. They and other families continue to be on a search for answers. I hope you can see where I'm going with this. There are victims created daily by the ineptitude of others. These are just some of them I've met. Some of their stories are dramatic, some aren't, such as those affected by the seemingly benign issue of toxic algae in western Lake Erie, the life-threatening pollution that has occurred almost annually since 1995. The most prevalent form of that algae, microcystis, has the same toxin, microcystin, that killed 75 people at a kidney dialysis center in Brazil in 1995. While there are no reports of deaths from exposure to it in Lake Erie, the stuff is more toxic than earlier realized, and even the Ohio Department of Health and the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency hadn't posted signs on it for the first 15 years that it existed, not until they didn't start doing that until 2010. Algae hurts property values, it's a public health threat, it hurts drinking water, hurts tourism, hurts the fishing industry, and hurts us in many ways other than our altruistic vision of nature. It costs us jobs and has smeared the Toledo area's reputation internationally, making it even harder to get jobs to come here now. Okay, another show of hands. How many of you out there know the name of your local water treatment plant operator? A very important person in your community. Anybody know who their water treatment plant operator is? Oh, there's a couple more shots of algae while we're thinking on that. That hand right there is Jeff Reuter from Ohio Sea Grant, who has one of the most famous hands now on the algae issue. That photo is shown everywhere. But this guy's name is Henry Biggert. Henry Biggert is a hero. In 2013, when Lake Erie's algae was the algae toxin was on the verge of overwhelming the tiny Carroll Township water treatment plant in northern Ohio, which serves only 2,000 residents. It's over by the Davis-Bessie area. Henry simply shut it down without waiting for authorization from the state of Ohio or any other government officials. He just did what he thought was the right thing. In so doing, his plant became the first, and to this date, the only one in Ohio to shut down because of algae. As you know, you went through a lot of inconvenience here the first weekend in August. Toledo made international news when Lake Erie's algae got so bad that our tap water was declared unsafe for the metro area's 500,000 residents for 3 days. Our plant didn't actually shut down. People were just told to stay away from it. And again, it's a prime example of how pollution can cost us jobs and be a threat to our public health. So that's another good look at the fun stuff there. That's how I put that up, just to show people how Lake Erie should be enjoyed, how it should be thought of, and how we should be able to use it. But let me leave you with an excerpt from a column I wrote after Alexa Brown's death. Not knowing the full extent of what Warren and Wendy endured in watching her die, but having a general idea. It's been cited by some people in groups, even though I almost don't remember writing it. And here's the section I was referring to. Quote, pollution is nothing other than a lack of accountability, a sign that someone has wronged someone else. It alters our climate, our landscape, our food, our water. It can bring death. Alexa Brown was one of about 20 children in the Clyde area who've been diagnosed with cancer since 2001. A figure that, and I believe the number's higher now, a figure that authorities have concluded is no statistical fluke. There's an environmental trigger. Somebody somewhere messed up. Now kids are dying. Officials theorize it was a short-term problem because of a 2005-2000 spike in new cancer cases hasn't been duplicated. So what? Somebody needs to be held accountable. What happened in Clyde is an environmental crime, but it's a crime nonetheless. And that's it. Let's see if anybody has any questions. Jim?
Tom, you mentioned that these people are, many of them, victims of ineptitude or incompetence. As you take a look at the water crisis that hit us last August, whose ineptitude and incompetence would that be?
Good question. I think, and I don't mean this as a cop-out, that there's a multitude there. I don't think you can...
Tom, would you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. Jim's question was, if pollution is largely a result of somebody's ineptitude, then who's to blame for the toxic algae in Western Lake Erie? And as I was saying, there's a multitude of sources. We always want to try to stick the blame to one person or something simple, but farmers shouldn't have to shoulder all the blame. I mean, there are practices they should be doing to improve, and several of them are, responsible ones are. But keep in mind, as a society, we're the ones who aren't doing enough, who have destroyed many wetlands that could filter out some of the runoff. We're ones who are demanding that more food be produced on less land, and that's something I said earlier in my talk, that the pressure for land use is going to get more and more greater. For years, we've condoned the practice of sewage overflows here. I mean, it's 2014, and we're still having raw sewage spill into our rivers and creeks. The city of Toledo is working on it, but it's a $521 million overhaul that they're not going to complete until 2022, I believe, 2020 or 2022, and to even try to reduce those to only a few times a year. There's a multitude of other factors. I did a story recently that even with all of these inputs that are coming from farms, from sewage, from septics, from all these other ways that phosphorus even gets into the water from the air, that allowing invasive species like zebra mussels and quagga mussels into our system, that scientists believe that because of the way they spit out or poop out the phosphorus, that it exacerbates the problem. They're not the source of the problem, but they exacerbate it. Climate change exacerbates the problem. I mean, in some small way, you guys leaving on lights in your house when you're not using them adds to climate change because of our reliance on coal-fired power plants, and that in a small way contributes to Western Lake Erie's pollution. So anyways, it's a very complex, it's not as simple as identifying a single culprit here for the algae issue. Other questions? You guys have got to have questions. I mean, I know you're smart, you're young, adventurous, ambitious, and not everyone's asleep yet. Matt?
I'm just curious, have you ever been covering a story and know that the truth is being covered up?
Yeah, or at least you've strongly suspected it, and we're always caught in the position where we need to peel behind the layers, get to the truth, but we also need to be fair to both sides. And we have an obligation to be fair. We don't have an obligation to print bullshit, but we do have, if somebody is giving an explanation for their side of the story of what, we'll print that. We'll give them their voice and give them their platform. And there may be other people that, may present compelling evidence to show that it's not, that they have a stronger argument. But it's always, especially, an environment, and like I said, science has so many gray areas and so much gobbledygook and uncertainties that you need to be fair and balanced. You need to have sources that you can trust, so that you're not needlessly inflaming a community or putting it to sleep for something it needs to know about. And it's a very delicate balancing act, doing all that and trying to keep people happy between what this side's presenting and this side's presenting, and hoping that people can see the truth somewhere in between. Questions? Go ahead.
Was it partially due that one problem of the water crisis back close to the end of summer was Toledo, the water plant wasn't testing their water for algae?
The question is, if I have it right, was Toledo testing their water for algae? Was that one of the problems? What's that?
Part of the water crisis problem, was it because the water plant wasn't testing the water?
They were testing it. What happened was it came upon them. It was kind of a perfect storm of the conditions. I mean, there was algae, and I heard from the water plant operator they were testing the water, and they heard that the algae was bad up in the Monroe area, and the winds were blowing it down. And to look, because they were given a tip that it's coming your way, and it ends up being bunched up and clustering around the intake. I was there. I went out on a boat with other people the second day of the crisis, and Jim was there too. And I mean, it was thick as green paint. It was just, I think you were there, yeah.
Wasn't there for that one.
You weren't there for that was a different one. That was a Sea Grant, but out at the Toledo intake, it was thick as green paint. But they were testing. They basically got to the point where even with testing, it just got to be too much. See, what they do, they have a treatment process, and they actually have the advantage because anything, as it's been explained to me by the senior chemist, anything in chemistry depends on the dose of what you put into it and the amount of time it has to bind and to take effect. So they have, from where the water gets drawn in and goes to the plant, several hours where chemicals that they put in, one in particular, potassium permanganate and others, but they come along, they have time. So by the time it reaches the water treatment plant, it's already had a lot of the you know, a lot of the treatment has been pre-treated, and it's not too hard to handle. But in that case, it was just too intense, and they were overwhelmed. So, other questions? If not, peace. I'm out.